Hi everybody, Rob Bernholz here for AE Toots. Recently, I gave a Zaxwerks Pro Animator class where we took a baseball team logo and created a full-blown 3D animated transition with it. Today, I'll walk you through some of the same steps using a fictional team's logo, so hopefully by the time we're done, you'll have a good understanding of what it takes to create a great 3D animation starting with a EPS file delivered by a client. So let's start. Here we are in Illustrator looking at our artwork. It has only one layer. Everything's been flattened. Let's pull this layer menu out here and take a closer look and open it up. And what we can see is all of the components of this logo, of this art, hundreds of potential layers, paths. Here's a group. It's got compound paths. Everything in it is just existing in one layer. Now, we need to prepare this for use in Pro Animator. And by prepare, I mean separate out all of the different groups of the logo, sort them out into their own layers so that we can extrude all of the elements that we need to make this a great 3D animation. So let's start with that. Now, this art already looks pretty organized. We have a group here at the top. If I expand that, I see that it's all of the letters in the text as compound shapes, and they're grouped together. We have all of the threads from the baseball. They are individual paths, so we have to clean that up. Looks like we have the baseball shape itself. We have a group here of just the skyline. Let's take a look inside, and we see each individual building. Turn a couple off here so we can see pretty clearly. We can remove buildings. Each individual building is its own path. We have a starburst or sunburst, and we have the background. Everything already separated. For Pro Animator, I'd like to be much more organized. I'd like to group all of these on their own Illustrator layers. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll start right off with this text layer. Here's all the text. Let's just highlight this and say Release to Layers Sequence. And voila! What we have is each individual text layer. Turn off a letter. Here we go. Each one is now on its own layer. It's grouped within a layer, but for now that's fine. So we have layer 2, and we'll call that team name. All of these paths on the baseball. In fact, let's just put the whole baseball together. Highlight all of those and say Collect in New Layer from our little flyout menu, and now I have a baseball. We'll call that baseball layer. The building, same thing we did earlier. I'd like all of these to be their own path or be their own layers. So let's just say Release to Layers Sequence, and every building now is its own layer. Pretty good. I like that. Let's call that Skyline. If I could only spell or type. Sunburst. Right now it's a path. Let's make it a layer. Collect in a new layer. Sunburst. And collect this in a new layer. Let's call that background. And this guide is extraneous at this point. Let's just delete it. Now, all of these are layers. Let's highlight all of them, drag them up out of their current layer. That leaves us one blank. We'll just get rid of that. And now I have the logo separated into layers. Perfect for what I need. Great. Let's save it. Now, saving, we're going to do a save as. I don't want to save over the original. But saving for Pro Animator, very, very important. We're going to save this as an Illustrator file. So, Adobe Illustrator. Let's call this Skyliners logo prepped. Save. And for Pro Animator, we don't use any of the CS formats for Illustrator. You see there is a subheading here under Version. We click Version, what kind of Illustrator file we save as. We skip the CS, go back to the legacy formats, 10.9.8.3. I actually go all the way back, save everything as Illustrator 9 format. And we shut off compression. Now compression is not part of Illustrator 9, so it's not relevant here. But save as Illustrator 9. It won't affect your file or your art. It will open up in CS just perfect. But for Pro Animator, save as Illustrator 9. All right, let's go ahead and launch Pro Animator and see what we've got. Let's open an Illustrator file. We want to open this Illustrator file, Skyliner's logo, open by layers, use the Illustrator colors. Let's select, and we see in our workspace all of our groups from Illustrator have opened up all on the same plane with a basic extrusion. We need to separate them out a little bit. Let's select our objects. We have object mode. Let's drag by dollying. Let's turn on drag using the object's axes, which will force us to move only on each object's X, Y, and Z axes and not get these out of alignment. Yes, we'll tweak that. I'll move this back. I'll select the sunburst. Let's drag that back some. Let's take the baseball and move that forward. And if we change our camera view to the front for the time being, every object is an individual object. There's a building, there's a letter, there's our background, except our baseball. It looks like we've made a little error, and our baseball is not separated into threads and ball. It's just this one object, all flat. It's not at all what we wanted. We must have made a mistake. Let's go back to Illustrator and see what we did. Now when I made my team name, selected it, and created each letter as a layer, we did the same with the skyline, but with the baseball layer, I selected all the paths and said collect in a new layer. That was a mistake because now I have one layer made up of paths. So they're all one solid object when it comes into Pro Animator. But this is easy enough to fix right now. Let's just, with this layer selected from our flyout menu here, let's release these layers to a sequence. Click on that, and now each thread and the background of the baseball, they are all their own layers collected in a group. We can just save this over the old one. Let's go back to Pro Animator and just start again with a new scene and open up an Illustrator file. Let's open by layers, choose our Skyliner's logo, select, and already I can see that we're in better shape. Let's go to the front. Start pushing some objects around here. That's our background in object mode, dolly, drag with the object's axes, tweak it. We're going to push it back. Let's take our sunburst, let's push it back inside our background. Now, if I have all of these objects, you can see if I move the baseball now backwards, now I have that, I have the threads, everything is an object. In fact, if we go to our object list, and we see we have the background and the sunburst, which are single objects, everything else was a group. They've been separated out into their separate layers, because we said open by layer. Now, that's all fine, but it's very difficult for us to keep track of so many objects, even if they are all on one object track at the moment. So, like in Illustrator, what I want to do is keep myself organized. I'm going to separate out each of these groups and put each one on their own object track. That way I can do any special effects as far as animation and constrain them to each of those object groups. For instance, let's start with the buildings. Let's just shift-click across the buildings. And we just keep on going here. That's probably most of them. I don't think it's all of them. But from our animation menu, under track commands, because we're dealing with a new track here, let's move the selected objects to a new object track. There it is. We can double-click on object track 2 and change its name to Skyline track. Click there to enter it, and if I turn off the visibility of the Skyline track, You can see which buildings I've missed. I can actually just go back now and click on those, shift click on each of those 4 missing buildings. Let's add those into our skyline track. Move selected objects to the skyline track, and they are all in one track. Let's lock that track. Let's do the same thing now with the background and maybe the sunburst also. Just shift click on those. Let's move selected objects to a new object track. We'll call that one background track. Click there. Okay, let's lock that one. Let's take our text, shift click each of the letters. Back in the animation menu, move these selected objects to a new object track. Let's scroll down to see it here. And we will call this one Skyline Letters Track. Let's lock that. Now everything, in fact, is on its own track except the baseball at the moment by default. So I can start turning off everything, and all that will be left on the one visible track. Let's make all our tracks visible. Object track 1 is the baseball. So we might as well just rename that baseball track. Now that we have all of our objects and groups on their own tracks, it becomes very easy for us to deal with moving things around. We can turn on all their visibility. Right now only the baseball track is unlocked, so if I click in our workspace in object mode, select all, Command A, and drag, the only things I'll drag is the baseball. Let's pull that up into the foreground. Let's lock the baseball. Let's go to our text track, unlock that, select all of those, and repeat that. Let's bring our text way up here in the front. What's happening is a common issue in 3D. Of course, these objects we've moved closer to the camera are now larger. We have a scaling issue. The objects farther away are too small. We've lost the overall relative scale of all of our objects. In After Effects, there are lots of ways around this, including layer tools from Zaxwerks. Here in Pro Animator, we have to go by eye, but that will be just fine. So let's take our background. Let's start unlocking a few things here. We're going to begin tweaking all of our objects here. So unlock our background, select it, using our scale tool. Let's scale this up until it looks about right. Holding down the Shift key to constrain it. That looks about the right size. We'll have several more of these tweaks to go. In fact, while we're at it, let's go ahead and give it some basic texturing. Right now it's one color, but over here in the object view, let's go to a high right and see our perspective. Let's take those objects, maybe start with just the background, and let's give it a little more depth. Let's push it back again. Whoops, I'm in scale mode. Dolly, object. Let's push it back. Give it a more interesting bevel. Let's maybe give it a inset face, round. Let's see, what are bubble rims? Oh, that's kind of nice. And maybe on the material setup, instead of just having one solid color, let's go to our materials. Let's give it a nice chrome. Here we go. This blue reflective chrome is material number 2. Back to our scene. And if I hold down the Command button on Mac and Control on Windows, your Render Movie button becomes a test button. We can render out just this frame in the workspace. And I can see that I don't really like that bevel. I kind of like the material for now. But let's change that bevel to round. Let's go to a round, large edged bevel. Maybe back to the materials. Okay. It's a little bit too large of a bevel. Let's bring it way down. Do a quick render. That looks good. Now our sunburst, click on that. It's got way too large a bevel on it. That's making it extrude past the boundaries of our background. So let's just highlight those edges. That's more like what we want. I'll just keep that same texture for the moment, the original color. And so far we're looking pretty good. I can even move my camera around, just tumble it. We see that. That's pretty interesting. Pretty far apart at the moment, but we'll tweak all that. Now comes the whole point of this. What I love is the buildings. Right now I have a skyline. It should look like a city. And let's move in here. Let's just dolly in. And all I see is all of our buildings look kind of boring. They're thin. You can't really tell it's a skyline. The colors came in kind of weird. Let's lock everything but the skyline itself. I'm going to go to a top view here. Take a look at our buildings. I can select all because they're the only track unlocked. And let's give them some depth. Let's make the buildings. Ooh, boom. 100. Great. Back up to the high view. Let's push in. I'm going to change this bevel to an inset face. And let's go for a pressed box outline. Let's bring that edge scale way down. Yeah, 8 is good. And if we move on in here and take a good look, let's rotate around, you'll see that what we've done is created beautiful edges to the buildings. They have front faces, they have depth, they're all outlined, very similar to the original logo. It's pretty cool, but they're still all together. Now, I don't know any skyline where all the buildings are on exactly the same block. So let's move them around. Go to a top view. And let's just randomly start pushing them back on their axes. Object mode, drag using the object's axis. Let's take this one and push it back. Let's take this one, push it back. Take this one, maybe drag it a little bit different. Drag this one. Maybe pull this one out a little bit. I'm just going to randomly build them towards the front. Have my centermost buildings closest to the front for now. Actually, let's take this one's too far front. Let's move it way back. And if we go back to our front view, let's roll on in here, push around, and we see that our city, the buildings are becoming a little more pronounced. And from here we can see this one I would like to pull forward. I can drag it, object mode, on its axis. It will only move forward. Let's pull that one up. Let's tweak this one back. Let's go way back here. Maybe this one forward some. Whoops, go to the camera mode. Let's work on this side a little bit. Let's just take this one, object mode, dolly, pull it out, forward a little bit. Back to camera, let's just rotate around. And this one down here, we can move that forward. Object mode, dolly, push it forward a little bit. I think this is good enough for our demo purposes. Oh, I see one more. I don't like having this border here, so let's go to dolly in object mode, pull that one out a little bit. Push that one in. Let's push that one in. Okay, let's take a look around at our city. Lots of depth in the city now. I don't want to see the backs. I'd like to have them all directly into the sunburst. I don't like all this empty space up here. So back in object mode, dolly, we can select all and just push the entire city right into our background. Let's go back to our camera mode, take a look, and now we have a great extruded city coming right out of that sunburst. Oh, this is really looking very nice. And if I switch right back to my front view, all I need to do is scale all those city buildings back up. They line up, oops. I know they line up with the sides of this baseball here. So let's go back here, Object, Scale, holding down the Shift key. Quite nice. Look at that. When it moves, you really see the city. Now, I don't want to see this empty space either, so I have to do something similar with the baseball. Let's lock our skyline track, go back to the baseball. Let's select just the baseball background. Take a look from the top here, and let's start giving that a whole lot more depth as well. In fact, I'll give it even more depth than that. Let's dial in a number of 200. I don't like that bevel. Let's give it an inset face. Let's see, power bevel, bring the scale down. Let's drag it back on its axes to just in front of the city. Now the city is resting on the baseball. And I don't want the city resting on this color green. So in our material setup for our baseball, let's add a new texture. Let's just drag one here. We'll keep this green. And on the sides, let's make it something kind of chromy. Put that into number 3. And now the top of that, let's do a test of that frame. And now the city is resting on a nice chrome surface. Very nice, very shiny. In fact, I can see another tweak here while I am tweaking away here. Let's lock the baseball, unlock the background, click on our starburst, and drag that back in to place. I don't have to worry about the depth. I just want it back inset. Test render. That's looking pretty nice. Maybe my baseball's a little bit too extruded here, so we'll come back to the baseball. And it's these little details that go into the design. You just have to tweak away. Today we're not doing much editing. I want this to be as close to real time as possible to show that we can do this in a limited amount of time. Whoops, I hit the scale here. I meant to hit the depth of this object. And now let's drag it back out. Here we go. About my threads need to be adjusted here. Let's pull that up on top of the threads so the threads are just visible. Now let's select all of them and push them back into place. Right there. Do a test. Let's push our camera in closer. I think I can do something with these threads. Let's do a test render here. And while I'm getting pretty close, the threads are kind of angular. Let's take all of the threads and change those. So, highlight the baseball. Let's just make it invisible. Select the threads by selecting all, and change these to a round edges large. Bring it down a little bit. In fact, bring their depth down quite a bit too. So I can really round them out. And the material-wise, I don't need anything but red. Let's just drag that to number 2. And now I have nice red stitches. Take my baseball, italicize. I know it's the invisible layer. Make it visible again. Let's put it in perspective with the threads. There we go. The threads are showing just the way I like it. Let's click to our camera view. Let's look at the front. Everything looks great. except maybe my text is a little bit too far forward. So what do? We lock the baseball track, we unlock the text letters, select all, choose object mode, drag. Let's push them back where we want. A little bit in front right there. If I do a quick test, there's my logo. Everything looks like it's the right perspective. Everything's done except for texture mapping. This looks pretty good. At this point, I would save. So let's save this as Skyliners 3D version 001. And I say .pa. That gives me a Pro Animator extension, at least for my references. We save it, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Let's flip over here to Photoshop and take a look at the original logo again. I can see right away the buildings aren't orange. They have this nice turquoisey, gray-blue aquamarine color fill in them, a nice little grad fill. The letters aren't quite as green as they are in Pro Animator. They have a nice stroke to them. With that in mind, let's go back to Pro Animator and see if we can make a few adjustments. Let's start with the text. That's the easiest. It's right up front. Let's go to Object Mode, make sure our text layer is unlocked, which they are. We can move our camera in just to get a little closer look. Let's go to our materials. Selecting all of the letters, just Command All, everything on the only unlocked layer, and let's make this text. We'll choose from presets here as much as possible. It's a nice kind of powder blue for the front face. Drag it onto a front face. Let me do a little text here. And that's actually pretty good. A nice sky blue. Even though it's not exactly what was in Photoshop, which was a little more aqua, the owner of the team said I could alter the art slightly and the colors to make them more visible. And here we are. We'll take that blue for the moment, a little more contrasty. And we'll lock that layer. Now let's work on texture mapping the buildings, getting them the correct color. The buildings are my favorite part of this whole logo. They are really what's going to make this work great in 3D. So let's go to the skyline and unlock it. Move up here and in object mode, let's select all. All the buildings will be selected. They're the only unlocked track. And let's choose a front face of some glass. Here's some Coke bottle kind of color texture. This is really, I think, what's going to be great. Let's drag it right onto the face of the buildings there. Let's do a quick render of this frame. And that isn't exactly what I thought. That's kind of interesting, but not quite the right texture. I want to stick with some presets here so we can work fast. Don't need to make my own new texture. Let's see what this one is. Same thing, select all. Let's drag this texture. It looks interesting on the front. Do a quick render of the front. Oh, that's perfect. It's slightly transparent. It's very close to the original colors. And it really gives an incredible amount of depth to the buildings because you can see from the inside their extrusions as well as on the outside. In fact, if we were to just go to the camera animations now and start clicking the try button, I bet we come up with something very close to usable even in this current state. Let's see. Well, how's that for a perfect transition? The only thing that has to be altered would be the timing. So right away, we're in a usable state. It's not perfect. We still need tweaks, but we can render this one frame out in test mode, and we see that that looks pretty good. It's got nice reflections. The bevels are all nice. The colors are all nice. Our letters look good. Everything looks great. It's a little bit dim, though. So while we're staying here in Pro Animator, I almost always adjust the lights. This front light, by default, is just a little bit too high for me. If I move it to the front a little bit more, you see we get much brighter. I also will turn on its shadow and do another test render. So if we enable shadow casting, it's still a little bit too much shadow there, and it's a little bit too high. Let's bring the light a little bit to the front. Maybe bring its intensity down slightly, about 95. Bring the shadow down to about 50. Maybe turn its softness up a little bit to about 10. And let's render a test frame. Now we're talking. That looks great. Let's deepen the blue in skyline and do ourselves another test. Back to object mode. Make sure my letter track is unlocked. Let's select all. And let's give it a shiny blue front face. Dark. One more test render. Very reflective. I think that looks great. Let's play it. And we already have one usable camera move. Let's render this one, see what it looks like. Took about 10 minutes to render, and when you consider the original artwork was only delivered about an hour ago, and now we have a usable 3D animation, that is pretty impressive. We could make this better if we bring it into After Effects and add some more polish, but even in its current state, if I had to use this right now, I certainly could. Now we came up with this move just by clicking the camera try button, so we have nothing to lose to hit this a few more times, see what else we have. Well, don't really care for that one. That's inspirational. Can never go wrong with the ultra close-up flyby. Here's kind of the reverse of what we just saw. This one gives me a little bit of inspiration. In fact, with just a little tweak, I think we can do something remarkable with this. Let's take this first camera pose. Move it over here. In fact, pull back a little bit. Let's take this last camera pose. Let's see, tweak it up close. Move it over this way. In After Effects, we can probably just map a little video into this area or do a nice edit, and we'll have a great transition to use. Let's see what this looks like. Let's go back to the beginning, hit play. That really does show off the depth of the buildings, all of our reflections, the team name. This is pretty much a perfect transition. So we're going to end with this in this tutorial. Next time we'll go into After Effects. We'll take this to the next level. I'm Rob Bernholz. Thanks for spending time with me. I hope you were able to get a couple of good ideas out of this, maybe get inspired or learn a few new techniques. I'll see you next time.